Save the Semantics, episode 240. It is December 22nd, 2023. My name is Myro. This is the podcast where I ramble on for a bit about some shit. I have quite a lot of things to talk about, and not necessarily a whole lot of time. I found a little bit of time to record today, so I would like to take advantage of that. So I don't know if I'm going to record later this weekend. Most likely not. So I just wanted to kind of squeeze it in because I have quite a lot of things to talk about. There's a lot to catch up on. I wanted to record earlier this week during like the middle of the week or something just to go over some shit, but it didn't happen. That's okay. This week, I have slept like fucking dog shit. It is like no exaggeration, dude, and it is so frustrating because it has nothing to do with my work, it has nothing to do with my current schedule or anything like that. I have just slept like, my sleep has just been a dumpster fire, man. Maybe it's not that bad. Like some insomniacs will probably listen to this and be like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, what has happened is I have slept for like, I can more or less go to bed. It is just like throughout this week I have repeated the same shit over and over again like clockwork. It is frustrating. It is whatever Einstein said, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results is the definition of insanity. That's what I've been doing this whole week, man. I've gone to bed 11 or 12. I sleep. I get up. Guaranteed I wake up around like 5 or 6. I stay up for like a couple of hours because I can't sleep, and I'm like dicking around on my phone because I can't fall asleep. And then I eventually fall asleep at the worst time, which is around like 7:30, which is maybe like an hour or so before I need to really get up. I fall asleep, and then I get up at 8:30, and it doesn't give me enough time to do shit. So I'm like fucking rushing. I'm doing all of this stuff, and it's just been a struggle, you know what I mean? So I'm trying my best to, I just want to improve it in some way, shape, or form. So, the one thing I recognized is that I need to cut back on caffeine. I think that's a big thing. And then also like cut back on any caffeinated thing at like nighttime, because I've drinking teas at night and shit, and that's clearly not a good thing. So I'm trying my best to cut back on that, but I also need to like develop just a better routine in general, you know what I mean? So I think I just really need to focus on that. Maybe I need to go to bed early or some shit. I don't know exactly what, but it's been a problem. It's been like my biggest issue, like for a while. Like I know that I've sort of bitched about and complained about this on here for a good time now, but it has just become such a noticeable thing, especially this past week. And I don't know like what happened. I don't know what made it worse. Like, it might have to do with the fact, like, honestly, I think I've just started to pay attention to it more ever since my second bout with COVID. I feel like my sleep quality has just slowly started to decline since then, since during these like past few weeks, and it's just been like, damn, like I think I'm just sort of hitting the peak of how bad it is right now. So tonight I am going to sleep like a baby. I'm just gonna focus on sleeping. I'm not gonna do any other extra shit, even though I want to. You know, I don't want to go on Reddit and catch up on basketball and you know, play on my Switch for like another couple hours past midnight. I'm not doing that. I'm going to bed, and I'm gonna try to go to bed at a decent time if I can. If it's a little late, it's fine. I'm gonna give myself a bit of a grace period, but I'm gonna go to bed, and I'm gonna get 8 hours of sleep, man. Straight, uninterrupted sleep if I can. You know what I mean? Luckily, I don't have shit to do tomorrow, so I can sleep in and stuff, and I can feel a little better about myself. But enough of this fucking going to bed and sleeping for 5 hours, feeling like shit, and then trying to nap for a couple more, and then feeling worse off afterwards. Like, none of that. You're getting rid of that. God, you know? So yeah, that's what I've been dealing with for this week. It's been a struggle. Anyways, I just wanted to get that off my chest. So this past week, basketball here and there. I haven't been paying super close attention. Been sort of on and off on basketball. I'm actually going to a Warriors game tonight, which I'm very excited for. Gonna check out. They're gonna be playing the Wizards. Didn't realize they were gonna be on ESPN, which is kind of wild. Kind of interesting hearing the Wizards, getting a national TV game, but good for them. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I hope we win. We should win. Everything points to us being able to pull off the victory. But I'm not counting my chickens before they hatch, all that shit. So, but I'm excited for that. Let's get into kind of the meat of what I wanted to talk about this week, because I really wanted to get into it earlier, when I sort of had my, when I was in closer proximity to when I watched it. But last weekend, me and my mom, we went to go watch The Boy and the Heron, Hayao Miyazaki's newest film, Studio Ghibli's newest film. It could be potentially his last film, even though he's been saying that shit for like 20 years. But we went to go watch it. My mom was excited because she hasn't seen like a Ghibli film, or just like a movie in theaters for a long ass time. So she was looking forward to it, and I was also looking forward to it. I hadn't seen a Ghibli production in a very long time. The last one that I watched was Marnie and Me, which was fantastic. It was not Miyazaki. It was not a Miyazaki film, but I thought it was really well done. And I was looking forward to this one. I had no prior knowledge about this. I didn't look up anything. I didn't look up any trailers. I didn't read any reviews, anything like that. I kind of went into it pretty much blind. And so, ultimately, I was left disappointed with the film. Unfortunately, that was really just kind of the, really unfortunate sort of conclusion. And to my thoughts after seeing the film, there's a lot to appreciate about it. There's a lot to really, absorb, take in, potentially reflect on. This is a film that I feel is fairly divisive. Like, despite both the critic and audience reception on, in the internet, on like Rotten Tomatoes and shit like that, I feel this is a more divisive film than those kind of Metacritic scores necessarily let on. I just, like, this could be a positively accepted film overall, but in general, for like the general audience, I don't know. There's a lot to dig into. My thoughts, I kind of want to preface, my thoughts are going to be all over the place, kind of like the film, but it's not going to be a super clean and coherent, breakdown. I'm going to be jumping all over the place, but I'm going to try my best to keep them as organized as possible when I'm discussing this film, because I have a lot to kind of discuss and explain. I have a lot of thoughts that are that I feel are kind of incomplete as well, because there are some things that I just don't necessarily know how to feel about. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of preface that before I kind of delve into it. So this movie was, and this is something that I kind of learned about after sort of discussing the film with my mom after we watched it. But this film is kind of a reflection of Miyazaki's sort of life and kind of his own, I guess you could say, like, ruminations about the things that he's gone through. The most obvious kind of thematic element or obvious plot or narrative piece is in regards to his real life loss, early loss of his mother, and potentially kind of how he dealt with that at a young age. And I think that's sort of clear in the film. And then also you could point to like his upbringing post or during World War II and kind of post World War II. That sort of the movie sort of takes place in that period of time. It looks like kind of towards the end of the war, and so those things are after kind of learning about that, I can kind of reflect on that and see that that's a lot more present throughout the film. I'll just say this before I get into my criticisms, because I have quite a lot. The movie is beautiful. It is incredibly well animated. It is like beautifully realized. There's this kind of like surrealist sort of element going for it, which I dig. I like surreal art, like Picasso and shit like that. That's kind of, I appreciate that. But I feel that the narrative is what really kind of brought the movie down. Like, presentationally, it is incredibly well done. Like, it is just kind of up to standard with all the other Ghibli animated films, of course. There's some really cool animated sequences, especially towards the beginning of the movie, where the main character, Mahito, he's sort of going through this destruction that's occurring around him, and he's like the only character who has his like features sort of complete. Like, everybody else sort of like blurs into the background. It's like, it's really well done. It's beautiful. Like, everybody else is sort of a part of the fires that are happening around him and the chaos that's happening around him. It was very well done, and it was like really drew me in. I was like, oh shit, it's going to be that kind of film. It's going to be a lot more serious, and it's going to be a lot more tragic, I felt. And it wasn't really that. I could say, like, I feel like for people that enjoy films that sort of subvert expectations, this film might be it might be something that you might enjoy. But if you are subverting expectations in terms of like you're presenting something and you're sort of expecting some kind of, oh, okay, so this is how the story is going to go. And then if you like sort of like change, or you sort of morph the narrative to be actually something else, I feel like it has to be compelling enough for it to warrant your like your appreciation of it, in my opinion. You know what I mean? So, beginning of the film, the main crux and the kind of the obvious crux of the film is in regards to Mahito and how he deals with the loss of his mother. And he has this kind of strange and somewhat strained, it's sort of an underdeveloped relationship with his new mother, who looks exactly like his old mom, or his mom that passed away. And he's sort of coming to terms with that, and he's like, he can't accept her as his actual mom because that's not his mom, and sort of just kind of dealing with the grief of loss and shit like that. Like, these are very clear and common elements, and I thought that this was what the film was going to be about. I thought it was going to be how he comes to terms with the loss of his mother and how he ultimately deals with it and potentially grows from it. But it just doesn't come across that way at all. and it's fine. It doesn't have to, there doesn't have to be this conclusive, ending. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to feel like Mahito has to go through this sort of like characters, arc, similar to a lot of other, a lot of other characters have kind of gone through, and maybe like coming of age stories, I think, where a death of like a parent or a guardian is involved. Like, this is sort of a common, I feel like this is sort of a common, storyline or narrative. But it just, the additional elements that were sort of added on were not, they were not compelling to me at all. And it just didn't add any sort of, it just, there wasn't just, really was just like, there were pieces of ideas that were put into the film with potentially, in my eyes, or from my perspective, there is something that you could interpret from that edition, whether it's like an artistic edition in terms of what is being shown through the illustrations, or what is kind of being said through certain characters' dialogues. Like, bits and pieces are thrown in there, but it's just not enough to give me a sense of emotional attachment to any of the characters. And it's that's really, I feel, when I go into Ghibli movies, and that's maybe, the fault potentially lies in my own expectations of what I would expect, quote unquote, expect a Ghibli movie to be like, or a Miyazaki film to be like, you know what I mean? And because he sort of went in a less traditional and more like esoteric kind of, you could say, surreal and non-traditional direction with this film, that, maybe the kind of the fault lies with the viewer potentially, or the audience, for expecting like another Spirited Away or another Princess Mononoke, whatever, right? I think, I think that's, you could argue that some of the responsibility lies on the viewer and how they should approach, films and stuff like that. But what I kind of, I guess, like, I just wanted, for considering how heavy the themes and how much weight there was being held by Mahito and his character, I just felt like there wasn't a strong enough resolution, and I just felt, I didn't really feel a lot after watching this film. I felt frustrated, and I felt like kind of let down. That's what I felt. But that was as a result of my, after my kind of feelings towards the film in general. It wasn't the feelings that I had while watching it. You know what I mean? Like, I just didn't feel any strong feelings during watching the film, and I just felt, I don't know, it was just, it like, I was trying to like latch on to concepts and ideas. I'm more like, now that I sort of viewed the movie, I'm able to reflect on it a little bit more and think about, the symbolism and the thematic elements, and sort of what characters and what the world, like the dream world or like the underworld, what that kind of represents and whatnot. And I'm able to kind of glean some more things now that I think about it. But it just doesn't, like, I don't know how much more appreciation I can give this film after a second viewing. You know what I mean? Like, I think that there's only so much that I can kind of take away from it, because I did really try to, absorb things and really, enjoy the movie for what it was. But if I like go in on a second viewing with a much more kind of like analytical lens, I don't know how much more I'm going to take away from this, because I wanted to feel something, and I just didn't feel really anything. And that's really the most like disappointing part of this movie. With most Ghibli films, at least like the classics and most Miyazaki films that I've seen, I feel something, like maybe I don't necessarily connect to everything that's going on, but I at least feel like, oh, okay, there's this sense of adventure and wonder because the world is so like imaginative, and there's a sense that there's a reason why these characters or these things are being drawn or things are being shown. But for this movie, I just like I'm really trying to reflect back on things that made me feel, and I just can't think of any. There's one of the another big issue that I have with this film is the pacing of it and the way that it's sort of structured. The first half of the movie is incredibly slow, and based off of the things that they set up at the very beginning, where it's sort of like you see how Mahito is sort of dealing with his grief and his kind of relationship with his new mother and living at this new location and kind of discovering kind of the little mysteries of where he is, and it's building up to something, right? But but like when you look back, it's like that buildup was not worth it at all. There was nothing that felt. There was just a lot of scenes that didn't feel necessary. There were a lot of scenes that felt. I'm kind of talking about in the first half as well. There were many scenes that did not feel like it needed to be so long to stay kind of like, oh, we're gonna just kind of like. We're going to let you view the serenity of this location and let you kind of sit with it. And I was like, okay, let me sit with it. Let me try to take it all in. But it just, like, I thought, I think it would have been more interesting, and maybe it would have been less exciting if they maybe just stayed at the mansion location and they didn't go into kind of this fantastical world. You know what I mean? Like, if they had just, like, sat there and he sort of, like, built up these relationships with these characters within kind of the context of the real world, and he didn't have to go into, like, the underground world or the underworld, I think that might have been a bit more... There might have been a bit more there. Because we just don't... He doesn't interact with these characters enough for me to feel any connection to them, or feel that there's like this strong tie or relationship between him and any of the other characters, because we don't spend enough time with them. And once we get into like the underworld, whatever you want to consider it, the spirit world, the dream world, then it starts to really pick up. But at that point, it doesn't give enough time then to, again, consider the relationships that are kind of occurring. There is sort of this sense of, there is a bit of an adventure going on, but it just is not. You're like, why is, like, you could try to interpret why a certain thing is happening. It's like, okay, why is this happening right now? You know what I mean? I feel like there's a lot of scenes that don't have a purpose existing in the film. Like, they just don't add anything to the film, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, it's just sort of there to sort of continue the plot forward, but it doesn't add... I don't know. Like, I was just really struggling to... It just felt like... the pacing just felt weird, and it just felt disjointed, and there were the last like 10 minutes were just kind of this like rush to like the finish. They started introducing all of these concepts about the world and the dream world and these characters, and you're like, like, what is the significance of this character? They introduced this one character. I'll try not to spoil anything, but they introduced this one character towards like the end of the film, like literally, like pretty much like the last 10 minutes, what it felt like. and they have such like a they have such like a significant impact on the plot and the world, where you're like, why though? Why do they? How did their presence affect so much of it? And like, what does their, like, you know what I mean? And it's like, you could reflect on the real world and how the birds or the parakeets could potentially symbolize, like, I don't know, fascism or totalitarianism or some kind of, you know, you could insert group here, like, you could make that kind of comparison to a real world comparison, but it's just not enough. It's not strong enough of an argument or strong enough of a connection for it to warrant that type of, from my perspective, it just doesn't warrant that type of in-depth analysis. You know what I mean? Like, you know, there are people out there who could really make those connections, but it's like, okay, but within the context of the story, like, what does this actually represent? What does this mean to the character? You know what I mean? And that's just like, I don't know. This movie felt very similar, and these movies aren't really at all the same, honestly. But like a couple of years ago, and I talked about this as well, there's a movie called Belle. It's an animation. It's a completely different story. But the pacing and the way things were structured in that film reminded me a lot of this one, of The Boy and the Heron, because they introduced this concept in the movie like it was sort of like meant to be like a Beauty and the Beast sort of parallel, but then it became something completely different. And this movie was kind of similar in that vein, where you thought it was going to be about a movie about a boy overcoming the death of his mother, but then it becomes like something else. That's just, and then like it becomes messy, and the thematic elements are just not strong enough to really give any sense of just like satisfaction. So like because like, and at the end of the movie, I'm not going to spoil anything. There is a resolution, but it's like, what did the main character learn? Like, how did he grow from this experience? How did he change or develop? We don't see that. I don't feel there was like a change in his character. Like, sure, maybe he like accepted his situation in a sense, but like, where in the story do we see, I don't know, like, where in the story do we see him like, okay, this is my life, I have to do the best that I can moving forward, I'm gonna accept it, and I'm gonna do the best that I can. We just don't see that, and I just don't feel it. You know what I mean? There's just too many loose ends. There's not enough time that was given to the characters, or for like the world building. Like, the world building was also like kind of really rushed at the very like end of the film, and it was like, okay, so like there's sort of like this concept of parallel universes or time travel or whatever the fuck, and it's like, how does this enhance the story? Like, it goes in too many, it goes in a completely different direction, and the main core thing, whatever it was, you know, whether it was him, like, you could argue that the sort of the theme of the movie was sort of stated by like the uncle or the great uncle of the world, you know, who, if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about, where it's like, you must create a world free of malice or whatever. It's like, okay, how does this connect? Like, how like, I understand Mahito's character is sort of like angry towards the heron at the beginning of the film, but where else does that appear? Where else do we see him exhibit emotions like that? Like, I just don't see it. what is the reasoning for the way in which the world was constructed? Like, is this dream world sort of a representation of the subconscious? I don't think, it just doesn't feel that way. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you could make it into a thing where it's like him looking at a reflection of himself, and he's also diving under the surface. So he's diving into himself to discover who he truly is, and maybe you could make something out of that. But that's not there. That's not there. It is not a movie of like self-discovery, which is what I felt like it should have been. It was not a movie about coming to terms with the death of like a significant person in your life, a parent or loved one, right? It just didn't, like, it was, but it didn't, it just didn't like deliver on that front. So what was this movie about? And I don't know what this movie was about. And that's really the kind of the baseline. Honestly, that's kind of my conclusion. I don't know what this movie was trying to tell me, and I'm like trying to figure out, like, oh, you should approach, like, you can maybe take away, like, oh, you should approach the world from a more, like, you know, from a perspective where you aren't seeking revenge or seeking to harm others. It's like, okay, but I just don't see that being shown in the movie at all. And that's, yeah, I don't know what the ultimate thematic message was. Maybe it's a lot of things, but all those ideas are very, they're not strong enough. They're not presented strong enough to give me a sense of like satisfaction. There's a comparison I want to make. I've talked about Ni no Kuni before. I've talked about, you know, how in the past I think I've talked about how I feel the Ni no Kuni and the Wrath of the White Witch is sort of a less superior version of the original DS game, which I have, the original game without the, you know, White Witch portion of it. So speaking of that, the concept of like that movie, or the game, this movie, Spirited Away, it's all kind of, you know, in the vein of like an isekai a little bit, right? You're sort of you're brought into this whole different world, and the sort of the inciting incident of Ni no Kuni is pretty much the same thing as this or as The Boy and the Heron. His mother dies, and he has to kind of come to terms with it. I feel in Ni no Kuni that the game does a really good job of presenting how Oliver, the main character, how he deals with his grief. And there's a lot more of a fantastical element with the game. And of course it is a video game, so like you're gonna be, you know, fighting monsters and that sort of thing. But just the idea in the game is it's a lot more concrete than it is in this film. The ideas in Ni no Kuni is essentially that there's like a separate world that's parallel to the real world, and things that are sort of manifestations in the fantasy world exist in the real world as well. Like, you know, characters, like you could argue, and I think I might have touched upon it as well, there are some things where it's like, okay, maybe it's not like the best way to portray things like mental health and shit like that. Like, you can't just cure someone of these things. But I think the idea, the thrust of the ideas, I think come from a good place, where you solve the issues of people that exist in the real world, in the fantasy world, by kind of, deleting or, getting rid of their woes and shit like that. Again, maybe not the best representation of that, but I like the idea of it, and I like the concept of helping people through sort of a kind of in a subconscious level, you know what I mean? And as Oliver helps all of the people in his life, in his community, the people that exist in, both in the fantasy world and the real world, some of that is kind of blurred a little bit, so, it's not always going to be consistent. There's some plot holes for sure that you can kind of like point out and shit. But the real sorry, I got cut off by some. I had to take a call. I might have to wrap up pretty soon. So I might resume this conversation in a couple of days because I have a lot to say. But the main thing is Oliver comes to terms with his grief in a very healthy way. I feel like it is heartbreaking. It is very it's a very, tragic kind of story from, it's a happy story for the most part because, like, he's adventuring and stuff. But the main conflict is he has to come to terms with it. And he has to. He does. And there's this sort of, like, inner realization. And it's really hard for him to really accept it. But he has the support of the people around him and shit like that. And I feel like the game does a really good job of capturing that. And I thought, maybe I let myself down because I sort of expected maybe The Boy and the Heron to kind of go in this similar route. But I just felt that the game did a really good job of doing that. So here's my recommendation. If you were disappointed by The Boy and the Heron and how it handled its themes, check out Ni no Kuni. I think The White Witch is fine. I think it's fine. I know that the DS version is not available for American, European audiences. That is a superior game in my opinion, but I still think it's the White Witch is fine. So that's my recommendation. I'm going to get into it more. I want to talk about there's still some things that I may want to get into the movie a little bit more. So I'm going to save that for a conversation for later this weekend. Okay, recording this on Saturday now. Continuing on, I had a lot to say. I still have a lot to say, but I'm gonna try to be as coherent as possible about my thoughts on the movie. I don't want to harp on it for too long. It's just I feel like once if I kind of continue to criticize the movie, it's just going to continue to kind of build up and stuff. Again, there are things that I can appreciate, and there are things that I can sort of take away from the movie that I can look back on and be like, that was an interesting concept. There's some really intriguing ideas that were presented here. Just overall, the movie The Boy and the Heron was just not it just wasn't I just didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to, and it's hard for me to kind of recommend it to a lot of people because I feel like although it is somehow having a good box office, I still think it mostly is coming from the fact that it's coming from Miyazaki and Ghibli, and it's sort of under the name and pedigree and stuff. And I don't know if it's necessarily a movie for general audiences though. So it is much more artsy, all that. Anyways, I was comparing the movie to Ni no Kuni and how I feel that the messages in the game, or how the central theme in the game was presented and concluded on a much more satisfying note in comparison to this movie, where the ideas were sort of all over the place and there wasn't a single thing that you can necessarily latch onto. I will give credence to the fact that the movie is 2 hours long in comparison to Ni no Kuni, where it's 30-40 hours long and you spend all this time with this character and all that. And I totally understand that. I think in some senses movies are probably the most restrictive media just based on the time alone. With TV shows, it spans obviously multiple episodes and like multiple seasons, so you have the time to spend with these characters and see them develop. With a movie, you're given like a pretty, you're just given a limited runtime, and you're not able to develop every single aspect of it. You have to do the best that you can within those constraints, and that's where some great movies come from. It's like no scene, no moment in it is wasted. Like every single piece or every single every single minute of the movie has a purpose in its existence, and why it's a part of the film, right? That's why like movies have to be sort of cut. And maybe there was, I think in the case of The Boy and the Heron, it's possible that a lot of things were potentially cut out from the movie in order to reduce the runtime and everything like that. You know what I mean? Because it really felt like there were some moments that were kind of missing, whether it be like explanations or just connecting scenes that would I don't know, that would make more sense to include in order to like transition smoothly from one set piece to the next. But we didn't really get that. So I think that so kind of extending that kind of an olive branch, if you want to call it that, to this movie, and saying I understand you're sort of within the constraints of a film, and you're not essentially given the same amount of time as like a video game or a TV show. That being said, there are still ways that you can make the ideas, the concepts, the pacing in it to fit and to be more just cohesive, you know what I mean? And I understand filmmaker's intent. I don't necessarily know what his intent was making this film and everything like that, what the true messaging was. And then it's I've heard that a lot of the interpretation is up to you as the viewer, and that's totally fair. I think that is completely fair to allow, to challenge the viewer to delve deeper into it themselves. And I understand that approach, but I just have struggled with this film. And again, I think that there's still ways, despite it being limited, that it could present its ideas more effectively. This is a completely different movie that I watched kind of recently. There's a movie called Nocturnal Animals. It came out a little while ago. And it's a completely different movie. But I felt that the majority of the scenes, I felt like really each scene had a purpose in its existence. Like there was not really a moment that was wasted. Like every single scene, every shot, it felt like it had a purpose in the narrative, in showing us, the viewer, something, some symbolism, some idea, whether it's like lingering on a shot, on a character, or, like there's these kind of smaller scenes with like Amy Adams where she interacts with people, and you're like, what? But those scenes have a purpose too. Like the dialogue it's a pretty well written movie. Like I feel like there's every kind of every line also has some reason for its existence. So I think overall that movie, like, I know it's not exactly the same thing, but it didn't like, it held moments where like that, it's a very different movie for sure, but every scenes that were sort of maybe a bit longer than others, there was a purpose for that scene existing. Like at the very beginning of the movie, there's an incredibly uncomfortable scene. At the very beginning, it's uncomfortable, it's tense, it's like, fuck, dude, let's just move, you know what I mean? And it was very effective because every moment it was like, dude, I just want this scene to fucking end, but it doesn't end, it just keeps going. And it's like, there was reason for that. It was building tension. It was continually building tension, and then just like the eventual sort of like conclusion, quote unquote conclusion of it is devastating too, and it helps add to that kind of, experience with The Boy and the Heron. When there's like certain scenes where it's like lingering on a specific shot, you're sort of there to, my understanding or what I felt from the purpose of those scenes is that it was meant for you to sort of reflect and take the time also to appreciate the artistry, but I felt that time was given for you to sort of reflect within the frame of this sort of painting and viewing it, but I just didn't feel there was enough to latch onto with those moments too. So, yeah, I think I feel like I've said my piece with this with the movie and my criticisms with it. There are still I feel like I can keep going in terms of the things that I can kind of critique with it. I guess one more thing is I didn't like the music a lot, unfortunately. Like, the piano pieces were like really nice, but it also felt a bit too. It felt like it was being, like the way it was, like, I don't know what exactly it was, but I felt like distracted by the music. Like, it felt like clearly someone was playing the music, someone was playing the piano while like a film of the movie was playing. Like, it didn't feel like it was it was composed to exist alongside the movie. Like, it felt like it was like a separate thing. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense whatsoever? Like, it felt like someone was playing the piano while the movie was being played. Like, it felt like very separate, and it didn't feel like it was together. There's some tracks in the movie, some of the more like orchestral tracks that I think are really nice, but they're so like few and far in between that I didn't feel like it was like super effective. A lot of the music, especially toward the beginning of the film, these kind of like quiet piano, piano pieces, while they are nice, it just didn't like, it didn't give me any kind of emotion to latch on. Like, it didn't give me like an emotion that I could sort of connect to. And it was a bit like, I don't mean this like in to give too much shade, but it did feel like kind of like the Breath of the Wild soundtrack. You know what I mean? Where it's a lot of ambient noise and pianos, piano like, songs. And while it is really nice, it just didn't give me this sense of wonder that I really kind of would want from a movie like this. Like, I feel like I needed to just be like brought in with the kind of sweeping sounds of, Joe Hisashi, but I just couldn't get that. And I know this is a very different movie from Miyazaki's other films, but just like the soundtrack from like Castle in the Sky and obviously Spirited Away, like there's just this you're just like, there's just these memorable tracks, and just the music fits when the the music that plays during the scenes fit, and they just feel like, oh, you're like, yes, it just encapsulates the experience, and it helps elevate the storytelling and in the moment too, and you're like, this is some good shit. The intro song for Castle in the Sky is fucking incredible. Like that, it's just like, you know what I mean? The music like elevated the movie, and it was also a part of the movie too. But again, like I said, it felt separate in this film for some reason. Like, I could just hear the music being played on the piano, and it felt like I was listening to it felt like I was listening to like a public piano player playing while like a silence, film, like, was kind of being shown. I don't know, man. It just didn't work for me. Maybe that's a very nitpicky thing. from my kind of, as a criticism for me. But yeah, it just that also kind of bothered me too. Like I just wish the music was a little better. Again, so yeah, I think that's kind of like the last thing that I wanted to say. Was the music in regards to the movie. It's entirely possible that if I come back to this movie later on, I might have some more appreciation for it. Like maybe a second viewing will give me a bit more perspective now that I have the understanding of, Miyazaki's kind of life and his, kind of maybe his childhood growing up and his experiences. But as a first viewing and kind of looking back on it, and I just didn't really enjoy it a whole lot, unfortunately. And I think there are people that are going to be that are going to appreciate it. Maybe some more, like, people that are looking for more, deeper themes within kind of the symbolism and images that are kind of shown. But again, this movie just wasn't it for me, unfortunately. So yeah, there were some things. Now we can kind of move on from that. There's some other things that I kind of wanted to touch on, for just to catch up on where I currently am at for 13 Sentinel. So I'm at the end of the game now. I'm like pretty close towards the end of the game. This game is, I've already given my praises for the game and all that. It's kind of like it's a very I think what it boils down to for this game is, like, as everything is kind of being revealed and you sort of understand what the character motivations are and what the ultimate kind of plot and what is really going on. Really sort of what it comes down to is that each character's kind of motivation comes from somewhat of an emotional and selfish place. And it's it's funny because of just how, like, chaotic the plot is, of how all over the place is, of how much emphasis they put on, machinery and, like, AI and just a very strong emphasis and kind of weight on technology and how much of an effect that has on the world and kind of the, just everything that's going on. Ultimately, this is a very human story. The motivations, what drives each character is just like a very, like, it is based on their relationships with other characters and their feelings towards them. That is what drives them to act in the way that they are. And it's all it's all circled around just kind of love. That's what it is. It's I don't want to give too much away, but that's what it is. It's what it comes down to, wanting to do it for someone else. And that's really what it comes down to. Some characters are more selfish, and they are they are sort of doing it for themselves for sure, but it is because they want to feel something. It's because they already feel something, and they want to have a sense of emotional fulfillment, and that's kind of what drives them. It's it is both like self-preservation and it's like an act of service in the for love. That's what it is. That's what this game is, kind of what it kind of is, really the bottom line. It's all of this crazy shit, but if you break out, if you peel away the layers of all the characters and what they're doing, they're all doing it for someone else, or they're doing it for personal reasons. It's personal, it's emotional. That's what they're all acting. It is like, it is not like logical. Like they don't act out of like, oh, it is the most efficient way to deal with it. No, they all do it because of their own selfish and personal reasons. And I think that's incredibly fascinating. And I love just like even the most, it's like the most mysterious characters, you start to, you break away kind of their barriers, like the characters that seem to be like the most cold and calculated, you break away their wall. It's like, oh, that's why they're doing all this, man. That's why they're doing all this. That's what it comes down to. It's very like, you're kind of like, you almost pity them, like some of the characters that are a bit more selfish and a bit more like, I don't know, that they're less, I don't know, they're less compassionate about others. Like even them, you're just like, oh, you're just doing it because you just want to be, just want to be with someone. And that's what it is. And I don't know, I really like that. I really like, just because it's such like a, it starts off so heady. There's just so much happening, especially toward like in the first like 10 hours or something. You're like, what the fuck is all this, man? Like I'm having a lot of fun, but dude, they're just throwing in more wrenches, more screws, just like more crazy concepts. You're like, what? There's now this, like, what time period are we in again? Like, what is happening? Who is this guy? Why did he do that? Like, it's all of these things, and then just like as you reveal everything, it's just far more clear. Like what, like you're just like, oh, all of these conflicts are from an emotional place, and yeah, it's very well done. This is becoming like one of my favorite games, and I've thoroughly enjoyed just kind of peeling away. This game is like a mystery. This game, you could say, I mean, it's a bunch of things, right? It's a whole, is like a, is a, I don't know how to exactly say it. There's a word. I know there's a word for it, but it is a combination of all of these elements of sci-fi, sci-fi kind of, it's like mecha battle, visual story novel, gameplay, choose your own adventure, kind of a mystery. It's all of these things, and it's somehow it works. Somehow it ties all together, and somehow it makes sense. It really does make sense ultimately. Like what it's just like I think that with things I found with games, or not even just games, but movies, albums, or anything that's, very intellectually kind of heavy. There's just a lot of conceptual stuff going on that might not be, that you can't necessarily like give like a surface level interpretation on. Like I feel like you can just sort of pick away at these things. It's like, oh, there's this, there's like a, there's the concept of, there's like the concept of like the collective unconscious or whatever, and it is like where everyone is like connected together in mentally, and the thoughts and ideas of everybody is sort of like combined and synthesized together to sort of create this like ether thing of that sort of exists within our world as a sort of a concept. And then, but if you just really break it down, it's just like, oh, everybody is feeling a certain kind of way, and that is what that's what's kind of driving this force, right? Like there's people feel strongly about something, and they want things to change, and so there is a subsequent response in which people strive for change to occur within like this, society or whatever. So I don't know. I think it's like you kind of go to a character's base motivations. It's like, oh, why are you acting this way? This feels illogical. It's like, yeah, because it is. It's not. He's not acting out of like. It's like, why would you make those decisions? Like, this just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It doesn't, because they're acting on emotion. That's what it is. And I think that's really like what a lot of, the if you can kind of like I feel, and I'm sure that this is very much simplifying things, but I feel that it is really the case where most characters' motivations are coming from a base place of like, it doesn't, like, it's not logical. It's just it's them being angry or sad, or just they need to feel, they need to like fulfill something that they're missing, or they're in love. Like, it's all of these things that drive characters to act in the way that they do. And I feel like this game has sort of given me a bit more of appreciation for, I don't know, a lot of mediums in general, a lot of stories in general, and just kind of looking at all of them across the board. Some of them are a lot more, some stories are very simple and easy to understand, but even with stories that are far more complex, like it's like, oh, like there's a conflict that is occurring, and that conflict might be somewhat complex because there's like history to it, but like the individuals that sort of are that kind of circumvent that issue, the way that they're motivated, it's like they're coming from a place of emotion and whatnot, because they're reacting to it, and they're dealing it how they will. So I don't know. I feel I'm able to like look at a lot of other stories and a lot of other like shows and movies and whatnot, kind of from the perspective after playing this game, because just the way it developed and the way that it slowly uncovered is very well done. And I really like how it presented that concept, if you will. And I don't know, it's just fun. It's also a very fun game too. So I'm very I don't know, like I'll probably talk about the game more as after I beat it, which will be probably up pretty coming up pretty soon. And yeah, I think I've spent a lot of time with this game. It's going to be kind of bittersweet moving on after I beat this, but I'm also looking forward to picking up some new games that I actually picked up on sale recently. So I got Okami, which is a game that I've been wanting to play for quite some time now, or quite a long time now. And then I picked up Disco Elysium. I might have mentioned this. Maybe I think I might be repeating myself. And so I'm leaning towards Okami just because I think the gameplay is a lot different. It's action adventure combat game, sort of in the line with like Zelda. So I think I'm gonna go into that first, before I go into Disco Elysium, because I think based on what I know about Disco Elysium, it is more like a strategy RPG, right? Or like more just kind of top-down strategy game. So I think I'm going to shift towards something a little different, because that is kind of similar. At least the combat is kind of similar to, not that similar, but it's more in line with like 13 Sentinels combat, even though it is pretty different. But you know what I mean. Just sort of like a grid-based combat system. So yeah, those are some of the games that I am looking forward to. Let me look at my calendar. So next week is New Year's, or just kind of the weekend before New Year's. Have I done like a New Year's kind of thing? I remember last year I was saying like I'm not gonna do New Year's resolutions or whatever. How am I feeling this year? I think this year, I don't know. There are already things that I'm kind of working on. And so I think I'm just going to continue to work on those things. So, I don't know. I think I might just do like a reflection on this whole past year. And then just kind of, talk about some of the things that I might be looking forward to next year, for next weekend's episode. And then obviously talk about basketball and other shit. So that is the plan. I know I've been ranting about The Boy and the Heron for quite some time in this episode, so I appreciate you for bearing with me. And yeah, that is going to do it for this week's episode. This has been Save the Semantics, signing off.